All right, so today we have my good friend David Talby, CTO and founder of John Snow Labs, also co-chair of the NLP Summit, which you can find at nlpsummit.org. This is a free online event scheduled October 3 to 5. But today our focus is NLP Test, which is an open source Python library designed to help developers deliver safe and effective NLP models. So David, welcome back to the Data Exchange podcast.
Thank you very much for hosting me, Ben.
All right, so let's do a quick rapid fire round about assumptions first. So let's this rapid fire round will inform the rest of our conversation. So assumptions around NLP tests. So first of all, as you know, NLP has changed dramatically. So when we first started, we wrote our own stuff. Then we started to have access to libraries like NLTK and Spacey. Mm-hmm. Then we entered the world of embeddings. So we got all these pre-trained embeddings that we could use and download. Now we have LLMs and APIs mostly, right? Mm-hmm. So assumption number one, workflow. So what does NLP assume in terms of the nature of NLP? Is it just NLP as it exists today, which is mostly now seems like around LLMs and APIs? So what's the underlying assumption, or does it matter to NLP test?
So NLP supports both models. So a lot of the focus lately has been on LLMs, on large language models. So you can definitely, you can directly use LLMs from, whether as an API, right, through, Cohere or Anthropic or OpenAI, or, through Hugging Face or John Snow Labs. You can also run them locally. And you can also use it kind of more the classic NLP, right? If you have embeddings and you're doing, name-entity recognition classification that way. But definitely the focus has been on LLMs throughout the most recent development.
So we need to rename this to LangTest.
We probably do need to rename this to LangTest, yes.
All right. So second assumption, users. So again, I guess even 6 months ago, most NLP was done by data and AI teams. Now, because of these LLM APIs, developers, so full stack developers, mm-hmm. I call it the product hunt phase of AI, yep. Right? So where these full stack developers can now build the NLP enabled application. So what's your assumption for NLP tests? Who's using it and who's reading the results?
Yep. So the assumption is definitely developers are using it. In some cases, the people who write tests can be even domain experts, right? Because really you should be able to write tests, in Excel if that's what you need to do, right? You're testing for things like robustness, fairness, bias, data leakage. As you say, you don't need to be a data scientist, right? You don't look at embeddings, right? You want to come and say, look, I have this prompt, I have this question. What if I change the nationality, right? The religion of this person, right? Their gender. What if I change? What if I paraphrase this? What if I paraphrase the prompts? The prompt? Do I get the same answer? So absolutely, this is intended to be used by non-data scientists and really for us, definitely developers, but also really just for us, lawyers, medical doctors, subject matter experts.
So it's not peppered with ML terms like AUC or ROC or recall precision. So
no, so here's the goal with NLP tests. So we have those two, but the main point of the library and the main point thing we want to make to the community is that when you're evaluating language models, right, whether new large language model traditional, you have to go beyond accuracy, right? So when you're looking at accuracy, for example, you have summarization or question answering, yes, then maybe you have blue scores or rogue scores, right, or other metrics that you have. But for us, that's one out. So accuracy is 1 out of 10 categories, right? So bias is another one. Fairness is another one. Data leakage is another one. Toxicity is another one, right? Truthfulness is another one. Robustness is a very important one.
So what is the output then? So sorry, I haven't used the library yet. I will though.
Give it a go.
So the output then is something that a non-ML expert can interpret.
Yes. So the goal is the library does two things. First of all, you can either auto-generate or you can create a set of test cases. And a test case is for, if you look like the simplest stuff is like, text classification, right? You come and say, oh, I have a sentence, what's the sentiment, right? Or, here's the context, here's the question, what's the correct answer, right? For question answering or summarization. And then you have, accuracy test, you have robustness test, you have representation test, you have other tests. You have the test suite. So first of all, you can read it, you can export it. But then once you run tests, yes, what you get basically a report card that says per category, per test category, basically just like unit testing in classic, right? How many tests passed, how many didn't. Okay, and then what you can specify is what's your minimum pass rate. Okay, so we can come and say, for F1 scores, my minimum pass rate is, I don't know, 0.8, right? And I also want, I have a gender-specific test score, right? So I want it specifically for male, specific for women. For female, it also has to be at least 0.8. Right, and you can have so on my robustness scores. I want to have at least this many of them pass, and then it gives you this overall pass fail, right? So it gives you the scorecard and gives you pass fail for everyone. And then the way this is intended to be used is really just as part of your MLOps or build process. And it's like just the same way you use unit tests, right? You can say, here's my test suite. It's something that's readable that I can show to regulators, show to others. I can edit it. It's versioned. Every time I want to deploy a new version, I run it through my test suite, right? And I test accuracy, yes, because I care about F1 score, but I also test other things. We're working now. We have a basic like ML for integration. Want to make it more. It needs to be even better. But the goal is really to make it part of your MLOps pipeline, so that you also you store the test results, and then really you have a pass fail, right? And you can decide whether or not you deploy the model.
So it's literally a pass fail, and so I guess the question I'm trying to ask is, if I'm on a team and we don't really have a data science or ML expert, is there enough guardrails in this library to tell me that, okay, I've done enough?
To an extent, it's the same way. So let's say you have a classic, you have a function, right? The function finds the module of two numbers, and I say I want to write unit tests for this. And then you need to know something about it to be able to write good tests, right? So in some cases, we can auto-generate tests. Okay, so for examples, we have features automatically say, replace male, females with male names, first name with female first name, replace pronouns, change countries, right? So if you mention high-income countries versus low-income countries, we automatically have this list and we can do it. We change religions. Right, for things like first name, last names, we have common kind of white names, black names, Hindu names, Hispanic names, Muslim names, right? So we have some of those in place. But there are cases, for example, especially in question answering, where you need to edit it, right? Because if I said, what's the capital of France? And you say Paris, okay, if I change, what's the capital of Sudan? Like,
but you provide enough guidance, so you tell someone that, okay, you've done enough testing that the results are statistically significant.
That's one thing we can do. It's like, for example, one of the things you can do is come say, what's my F1 score for, say for only women, right? One of the first tests we do come say, well, if there's only 12 women in the entire data set, we're not even going to calculate an F1 score. So definitely some cases where we can do that, and we do, yes. But I would say at the end of the day, to test your software, you need to, you do need to know what it does.
Right. So the next question about assumptions is coverage. So again, the scenario I have in mind, David, is I'm a development team, and we're building an application that has an NLP or an LLM component. So how does this fit into the rest of my testing? So in other words, so imagine an application that, has a UI, and then it maybe calls out to an LLM or has an NLP model. how does this fit into the rest of my testing testing life cycle? So in other words, am I only testing, I'm literally just testing the NLP and the model with
Yes.
NLP tests, right? So
Yes. So in terms of your site, yes, this would be a component test. Yes. So it's not an integration. It's not a full end-to-end test. It will test exactly your LLM or your NLP pipeline or NLP models. Okay. You can say, for example, you have a, you're trying to de-identify text, right? So the question will be, okay, how well does this actually de-identify? Right, so you want to say my test suite, I need to have enough coverage to identify different document types, right? We say enough statistical reference. I want to make sure it works for different kinds of people, different kinds of places, maybe different types of languages, right? And the end, you want to come and says, look, I have different teams working, but the LLM evolves, right? It may be an API, right? So it's even outside my control, or maybe it's my own team fine-tuning it. Maybe I'm fine-tuning it based on feedback on once a week. But once I fine-tuned it, before I send it to production, I want to see that I didn't break anything, right? Not in terms of prompts and use, but also really not in terms of robustness, not in terms of bias, right? So that I know that my model works, right, and really works for accuracy, but also beyond accuracy. And also, we do a lot of work in healthcare. You want another reason why you want the test suite to be readable is you want to be able to show this to a regulator, right? You want to come say yes, like the reason I think that I have I have this level of bias mitigation and fairness is because I've actually done this, right? Here are the tests, here's what I think there's enough of them at a statistically significant level, right? This is actually versioned, I can show you exactly which test ran with each version in production. Really, the same thing you'd expect for any software, right? If you think about all we're trying to do here is we're trying to set the same standard that we have for classic software engineering, right now to NLP and LLMs.
So there's a lot of tools, a lot of APIs.
Mm-hmm.
So for a library like this, so what kind of integrations are needed? So in other words, if people are used to using certain tools and libraries, how intrusive is NLP test? In other words, is it something completely separate, or are there nice integrations with popular libraries?
Yeah, so look, it's first of all, I mean, it's a Python library, right? So it's not a server, it's not a different platform, it's not an API, and yes, it's very tightly integrated with other things. So I'm just looking now. So right now, in terms of what you can test LangChain models, AI21 Labs models, Cohere models, Databricks, Dolly models, Open Assistant, OpenAI, of course, Llama models, anything from Hugging Face, also Johnson Labs models, Spacey models. But really, honestly, between Johnson Lab, Hugging Face, LangChain, OpenAI, basically everything is there. So those integrations are there. And the other kind of integrations we're working on are really with different types of kind of MLOps tools and testing tools. But also those are really simple because at the end, really, you're just it's just another step in the workflow.
So David, going back to the earlier point that you made, which is basically NLP test is really testing the model,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, but now we live in a world where developers don't control the model, so to speak, right? So they're using the model. So in some ways, then, is it fair to say that one way to think of NLP test is a way for you to decide which model to use, like which API to use, right? So in other words, you have you have a language application, an application that relies on an LLM, but you have certain requirements in terms of whatever testing that you need to do, and then this makes it convenient for you to test a bunch of these LLM providers.
I would say yes. People definitely use it for benchmarking and comparison. Yes.
Because it's unlike before where you maybe have more control over the model. Now you're just a user of the model.
Yeah, but what we do see, I mean, our own work and also people using this, people do have control over the prompt.
Yeah.
Right. People do a lot of work in prompt engineering. If people use LangChain, you decide which tools you have, which agents are in place. Right. So like we see in our own work, yes, we do iterative work, right? And we try things. That's one. The other area where I hope tools like NLP test will kind of raise the bar. Right now, what we are saying, if you look at the current generation of LLMs or NLP models, there are serious issues with both robustness and fairness and bias. So with this, really, like, you add a comma to a prompt, you can break it, right? It's like super simple stuff. You change the casing, right? The punctuation, you do very simple paraphrasing, and you break your models. And the other things, really, if you look at stereotypes and really, race, gender identity, your models are misbehaving. And one challenge is, especially if you look at regulated industries. So if you're using LLMs, anything around HR, anything around healthcare, anything around legal, some financial decisions, and we have customers who know this. Look, like, it's already illegal to do this without testing, right? Or and people are beginning to get sued. But really, I mean, I think we want to get to a point, and this is why this is a completely free open source project. But really, the bar is, no, when you go to production, you don't just test on F1 score, right? Or or blue score, right? You actually know that your model is working across a bunch of criteria. Really, the same way when you test traditional software, you do functional testing, but you also do security testing, right? You do performance testing, right? And you do monitoring, right? And you have all of these other requirements, which should be in place, for you to really call it a production-ready system.
Yeah, and so you brought up the notion that these things are not robust because it's sensitive to the type of prompt you put in. And there's other parameters, right? So OpenAI, for example, has this notion of temperature,
Yes.
right? So you set temperature to 0, obviously it's not going to change depending on the prompt. But if you fiddle around with that parameter, which other providers will have equivalent notions of this thing, then you start. So in many ways now you're when you're doing your testing of these models, what are you keeping track? You're keeping track of the prompts, the parameters that underline this specific API, and then but then as since you do not control the model, there might be changes next week. Not that these models change every week, but it could be, it could be tweaked so that the same prompt you sent this week, with the same temperature, now returns a different result.
Yeah, and I would say that there are two other things that are happening with LLMs. First of all, there's this thing where, especially when you work with APIs, you can send the exact same prompt twice in a row and get different responses.
Yeah, unless temperature is 0.
Sure, yes, but it rarely is. But
it rarely is. Yeah.
And the other thing to consider, especially when you're building more information retrieval-based systems, is also really which embeddings are you using, right? If you're using a vector database, and we do a lot of work when we play with different embeddings, right? And you try to see really what works best, right? So one of the things you want to do, okay, I'm going to try different embeddings or different settings of my vector database, or how do I do my ranking? But then really what I want to test and measure on is, okay, what is my benchmark on my downstream question answering task, right? So that's another use case that's very common, right? And whether you're using something like Haystack or LangChain, right? Then there are even more moving pieces for you to play with.
Yeah, and all these libraries change so fast, right? So LangChain, if you don't update every day, you're outdated, right? So
yes.
Llama Index is similar in that sense, although that project may stabilize faster than LangChain. LangChain to me seems like the footprint is too big. It in some ways, right? So because basically, and you see this a lot when you read through Hacker News, people say that it's I kind of feel similar in some ways. It's great for exploration, but since the library is moving so fast, when you actually know what you want to do, right, the sequence of services and libraries that you want to do, you might as well just code directly against.
Yeah, just code directly. Yes.
Right, because you can't really deploy something to production that changes every day.
Exactly. Yes.
Right. And so what are some of the more popular tests? I'm not sure if you guys keep track of how people are using NLP tests. So, yeah, if you're comfortable sharing some kind of high level anecdotes or statistics about what are people using it for? What kinds
Sure.
of tests? Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I think that the most popular are probably the simplest, which are robustness tests, right? Which is really looking at tests, even if you're doing, summarization or you're doing name entity recognition, text classification, looking at things like really, adding typos, paraphrasing the text, changing temporality, changing the case of the text, adding, changing punctuation, those types of things. Because I think people underestimate how fragile the current NLP models and LLMs are, right? And for me, really, I would say initially when I saw the list of initial tests, I was oh, like, you just uppercase and lowercase remove punctuation, that's not going to find anything, right? Like, BERT models and definitely LLMs are not going to fall for that. And I can tell you, they do fall for that. They fall for it all the time. And really, you see models that really, if you change everything to uppercase, F1 scores fall by 20%. With really some of the most popular models on Hugging Face that we are testing. And for us at Johnson Lab, a lot of what we're doing now internally is we're upgrading our own models, right? So we're augmenting the training data while we're doing that. And then when you go to robustness set, you want to go further, right? So, change the speaker of a sentence, right? Say something like, oh, in the past I used to think this, but today I think that, right? Past versus present, or just a lot of paraphrasing, which you can do today, change, active voice to passive voice, just change the order of a compound sentence, right? So instead of A but B, I can do B but A, basically saying the same facts. So I would say, usually I would say when we start, those are kind of the first things that break, and you can see very significant gaps in accuracy. One of the things I've learned over this past half year, a lot of the like really free models, when people do an academic paper and lower the checkpoint, this is nothing. I would never use this stuff in production.
Yeah, you can actually see. I think you're familiar with that LMSys leaderboard, right? So you can really see that some of the proprietary models are a lot better.
Yes.
There's some like Vicuna is probably the best of the open source, although it doesn't really have the right license.
We have Falcon now. Falcon has the right license.
Yeah,
70 and Falcon 40B.
But you can see that unfortunately, at least for general purpose tasks, yeah, the bigger models seem to be better. Now it might be different for more domain specific and targeted applications, but and speaking of robustness, by the way, I think part of the reason people get confused about robustness is, I mean, for a lot of people, they use this in a generative way, meaning, write something for me and or summarize something for me. And there maybe your threshold for the answer might be, your threshold for what's a good answer might be lower. But when you're doing something so specific or extractive, so for example, you use these models for I don't know, entity extraction or something there, and it happens to be the case that you really wanted to get the right answer, then their robustness really matters. But I think the confusion is some people associate it with tasks where their threshold for accuracy might be lower, right?
Yeah, I would say, look, of course, it depends on the use case. But by the way, there's a new paper that came out really just this week around evaluating ChatGPT and GPT-4 on biomedical information extraction tasks. And one of the things found is, yes, that the significantly worse than kind of your classic, PubMed BERT models. And they do it on 8 benchmarks, and they see it's between 10 and 40% worse in terms of F1 score.
And that's not a surprise, right? So
yeah, it's not a surprise, exactly. Yes, but I think initially when GPT-4 came out, they kind of said, oh, these models are going to be just better in everything. But I think just like there's a no free lunch principle in machine learning. Whenever you have a model that's fine-tuned for a task, for a data set, it's going to be more accurate. And I could say, look, I mean, a lot of the work we're doing in Johnson Labs, yes, we're building healthcare-specific LLMs for clinical domain, for biomedical domain. And first of all, yes, it's about accuracy, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's why I think, as we noted earlier, is we're living in an era where people will need to be comfortable using multiple things, right? So you may want to use something general purpose that's cheaper for a certain stage of your pipeline where accuracy might be, not as important. But when you get to the really accurate stuff, maybe you need something more focused and specific, right? So.
No, yeah, absolutely. Look, like for example, look, if you work on a patient, yes, if you want to extract their lab results and what it means, you'll want to use definitely a healthcare specific model. But now if you come and say, okay, here are my results, can you write an email to the patient? Yeah, that's a much easier problem. Absolutely.
Right. And there maybe you can go to this is a bad example because of privacy, but let's say you're about to write the email, maybe you can go to one of these public APIs that's a little cheaper.
Yes, and the issue, yes, and when you're looking at enterprise application, yes, so privacy is another issue, be able to run on-prem and not share data. But I think, yes, you'll expect this to be cheaper, and you should, right? And what remains to be seen is when you have those enterprise applications, really, well, like one thing you can do is you can just bundle a cheaper model and enable you to do that, because the problem is easier, right? Or can come say, if you only need to do it in English and Spanish and not in 100 languages, you don't need we can do it with, maybe 100 billion parameter model, right? And not a much bigger one, right? If you have more specialized model, it can be even, sub 10 billion models. But yeah, I think it's super early on to see, what will actually get adopted by industry. I definitely see a future for domain-specific LLMs, and I can definitely see, to your point, people combining different APIs or libraries for different tasks. Yes.
So again, putting on advocating for developers and not data and ML experts, right? So I'm starting a project. I'm building an application that uses an LLM or a large language model, and I start using NLP test.
Mhm.
But NLP test has 50 plus tests. So are there like templates or starter kits for people so that because it might be overwhelming, right? So you see where I'm going, right? So
Yes.
there's 50 plus tests. So is it organized in a certain way? So these are tests for bias, these are tests for accuracy, and so on and so forth. So how should people think about these 50 plus tests and not get overwhelmed?
Yeah, so first of all, yes, they are organizing categories. So if you go, and by the way, the website is nlptest.org. If you go there, there's a tests tab that lists all of these tests that are available, and yes, they're organized by categories. So I'm looking now. We have accuracy, bias, fairness, representation, robustness, and toxicity.
Yeah, but for each of those categories, there might be 10 or 20. So I'm overwhelmed regardless. Right?
Yes, so you have two options here in terms of how to start. One is you can start with notebooks and examples that are there, right? So you can say, I'm just doing a question answering thing, right? So you can come say, look, here's a notebook. It starts with these, these benchmarks, and here's how you can start your own. So that's one way people start. The other thing that's useful is the library can also generate tests for you, right? So you can come and say, I trained the model, right? Here's my test set. Right. One of the things that NLP test can do for you is generate additional tests. Right. So comes that for robustness, for bias, right, for fairness, it can basically grow your test suite. Right.
So wait. So how does it work? So let's say I'm testing for robustness, and I use one of the basic robustness tests, and then at what point does it suggest to me? Do you want more?
There's an API, so you just call .generate. So
Okay.
basically, and it's super simple. There's basically like 3 methods.
So it seems like David, what you're describing is the equivalent of AutoML for tests in the sense that, okay, so I know I'm testing for robustness, but I'm not an expert, so can I just rely completely on the auto generate, or is that not advisable?
Yes, so here's the process we have. So first of all, yes, one cool thing about generative AI is that we can generate those tests, right? So for example, you come and say, here's my test suite, right? And you come and say, you have test suite, like for example, Mr. Johnson, went to whatever, went to Los Angeles, and you want to see that you can answer the question, right? You can say, no, you have Mr. Johnson. Okay, how about try, Mr. Salim, right, and Mr. Wei, right, and try, Mrs. Johnson maybe, right? See if you get the same answers, right?
So I see. So you come up with that initial test, and then you have the system generate more similar examples.
Exactly. So what you do, you come and say, look, here's my test to validation set that I started with, right? And then you call generate, and you come and say, look, please expand on that, right? And for every test type, we can generate tests. Okay, so we generate those other examples, right? That's one thing the library does for you. The second thing it does for you, it can actually run those tests. Okay, and we've done a lot of work, and we can run them really across all the libraries, right? So once you have a test suite, you can really run it across all APIs, across all libraries. Okay, so that's separate.
So what you're describing so far, this specific example, requires more domain knowledge than Python coding skills. So is the NLP test library something that lends itself to be used by someone who has more domain expertise instead of Python? Is that the enterprise version that comes with a UI?
So right now there's no enterprise version that comes with the UI. This is an open source library. We're doing completely free and open source.
But you know what I'm saying, right? So
Yes.
It seems like at some level it's about generating those initial examples to help the system to generate more. But the example you gave is simple, but if we're like in radiology or oncology, it requires some domain knowledge, right?
So here's how we do it. Look, in general, as you know, also like forget LLMs. To be a good tester of software, you need to be a domain expert, right? So if you're asking me to test a mobile app that does restaurant recommendations, right? I do a much better job as a tester if I'm a foodie, right? Because I know what to look for, I know what I care about, right? I look for very specific things, right? So really here, the main we're working on this now. First of all, after we generate tests, usually we do have a human look at them, okay, to see if they make sense, right? To see if there are things I want to add manually. And we do have cases, yes, our own data annotators or all medical doctors do this kind of work. Mostly they do it in Excel, right? So really when it comes to says, look, it's a one-liner, yes, you can generate the test suite, but then look, export it as a CSV, right? Because it's just a pandas data frame, and then people just look at it in Excel, right? Especially for some things that are more LLM related, like summarization.
And then what? And then after the domain experts look at it in Excel, the data scientist feeds it back.
Yeah, exactly. Then you update the test suite, right? So come say, change the summarization. Oh, and this is good example, but you should add another one for different disease stages. Right? Or this, yes, they changed the age of the patient, but you really should delete it because, this will never happen, right? Because some of the generated things may not make sense within a domain, right? So you want to be able to add things, delete, edit, but then, you take the CSV, you export it, and then, yes, that's your test suite.
It seems like this is something, so listeners out there who may want to put a little nice UX to capture this workflow, you can even describe it to Bard or ChatGPT. Maybe it will generate the JavaScript or Python code for you to build this simple web application. But it seems like having a simple web application will make this lower the friction.
I would agree with that. Yes. I would say, maybe we're just not there yet, and I'll be happy. Yes, if maybe we'll build it at some point. If others will build it, I'll be very happy to kind of include it. And I say, and also this is an Apache 2.0 license. If someone wants to build the paid enterprise version, please be my guest. We will be happy.
What you described basically applies to all of the test categories. So bias, same thing, right? So I can generate an initial few test cases, and then the system can generate more. I pass it to someone more knowledgeable than me if it requires that.
So for example, one of the bias tests is take names, and within Hindu names, we have common names by caste. So you come and say, I want to have coverage of all castes. So yes, it would take the one example you have and just replace name and generate other things, right? But that's one thing it can generate for you. Yes, and then you can look at it and come and say, okay, does this make sense to me?
And then feed it back to the system, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes, and usually it's we generate tests, then we do have someone look at them, a domain expert, right? Because some they get ideas, then you more things, sometimes they delete things that don't make sense. And then you come and say, okay, here's my benchmark. And then, yes, like, version this, right? Now, every time we work on the model, okay, run through this test, see if we pass.
So when you folks use the phrase data augmentation in the context of NLP test, this is what you mean by that, right?
Yes. So data augmentation is the third thing this does. So this thing can generate tests, can run tests. The third thing it does for you is augment data. Okay. So let's say you come, you look at things like, for example, Indian casts, right? And you come say, oh, my results are horrible, right? For example, one of the reasons we started this NLP test, but 3 years ago we had a case where we had a de-identification model, and a customer told us it did not work as well for Asian names. Okay, so let's say so now I have Asian names in my test suite. Okay, great, and it tells me that I'm not doing well. So one of the things you can do simply is come and say, well, can we just add it to the training set? Okay, add more example of Asian names. The problem is you can't add your test data to the training set, because then you have classic data leakage, right? You'll test on your training data.
And also you may not control the model.
Yeah, that's true. In some cases, you may not control the model. Yes, but we are looking for cases where you can retrain or fine tune. But then we do have the ability to call augment. What augment does, yes, you give it basically your current training data, and we augment it. And the important thing about augment, it does not use the test suite.
No,
right?
but when you say augment, so does it say do you have to tell it? So, okay, so this is a name field, so augment it with names from this region. So how does it work?
Oh no, you just tell it which test types you want it to use to add things, right? To generate new examples in your training data. Right.
But does it have to know what type of field it is? Like, is this an address? Is this a name?
So for example, you have a test that says, I'll just try to look at the examples here, but for example, replace to female names, replace to Buddhist names.
Oh, I see.
Names, right? So come and say, oh, I just want more of these. Okay, so when you go over the examples I gave you, when you see something that's a name, augment it with more examples that are, Christian names, Jewish names, Buddhist names, Muslim names. Okay, by different tests, and you can configure which test types you want this. But basically, instead of generating tests, you want to generate examples that will go back to mostly to fine tuning, right, or training. And really, so it's kind of, if you can generate the example for tests, you can generate for training as well. The only thing you need to be careful is really to have a very clean separation between one used for training and one used for testing, right? So augmentation is a completely separate process, so you don't have data leakage.
So NLP test has been out for a few months. So what are some real world examples where NLP test has been able to detect and correct issues? It can be, it'll be nicer if it's not from John Snow Labs, but if it's from John Snow Labs, that's fine, but it has to be real world.
Sure. So let's see which ones we call out. Look, one thing I think we published this as a blog post, we looked at what was, I think, at the time it was just the most popular model on Hugging Face, which was just bird cased in English. And we look at robustness stats, and there's a blog post that shows, first of all, out of the box, there's some serious robustness issues there. But what we show really, a few lines of code, you use the data augmentation, you fine tune it, and you can substantially improve the performance in terms of just information extraction tasks, right? Like name, location, person, those types of things. So that's a public blog post that's out there. I would say, other than that, I'm just thinking about kind of example of projects we have. I just
or from the community.
Public yet.
Have you heard back from users?
Yes. So it's an open source project, so we do hear back mostly when people ask us to add things, right? Add different test types or different examples. I think what we're seeing, there's a lot of interest in bias and fairness. Okay, especially we do,
which are hard to test, right?
Which are hard to test, yes. But what we see, especially within the healthcare community, there's a lot of interest because in healthcare, generally people don't go to productions with models that may be illegal, right? And in other industries, a lot of it's you go to production, fix it later. In healthcare in general, no. You need to make sure that you pass all your compliance tests before you have the first use. So we're seeing a lot of usage with around bias and fairness in those areas. And one of the things people see is really something that honestly we should be testing earlier in other places. Models perform not as well on women, perform much poorly for black people with the LLMs the current generation of LLMs we have, and you need to find ways around it, right? Really before you deploy. So I know that there are a couple of papers that are underway, but I think are peer-reviewed, and
To close, so in the next 6 to 12 months, what will be the focus of the NLP test team as far as the 6 to 12 month roadmap? Is it adding more tests or adding more integrations? I guess all of what I list probably you guys are going to work on, but improving the auto generation and augmentation.
Yes. So look, right now the two main priorities. First of all, yes, just adding more tests, because there are still things around.
There's 50 plus tests.
Yes, it's an early start.
No. But I mean, for like I said, people might already be overwhelmed. But I guess this is where the auto-gen capability helps, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Look, and here's the thing. There, for example, a leakage of personal sensitive information we don't have yet. We need that, right? There are things about there are some new benchmarks around truthfulness, especially with LLMs that are not there yet that I would like to see added. Even on the ones that we did on
how do you test that? Right. So unless you have like
you need benchmarks.
Or you have a vector database with the true information somehow, right? So
yes, but true is in the eye of the beholder sometimes, right? And these are sometimes maybe cases we do see cases we say, look, we can auto-generate the questions, the answers. You need someone to actually put in there, right? A domain expert, absolutely. But look, only that there's a lot of ask really about fairness, bias, robustness to add things. And one other thing to consider, really, all the work we've done, we're talking about, for example, fairness and bias, it's all US English, right? So if you want to say, like in the US, you care about white people, black people, Hispanic people, Asian people, right? Maybe Native Americans, right? If you go to France, right? If you go to Brazil, if you go to Germany, it's like completely different things that people care about, right? Or different languages, different.
But the other thing that I think this field needs to work on, David, frankly, is having better citations. I guess I mean, as a reassurance against hallucination, number one, and number two, just better handle on. And this is something that I think this field doesn't really talk much about because it's inherently batch oriented. But being able to handle incremental updates or streaming information, right? Because new information could affect the answer, right?
Yes.
But if you have to wait another week before the thing gets put in there, right? So there might be a whole week where people are being given the wrong answer, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes. So I'd say definitely freshness is definitely an area to work on. So that's around it. So I'm saying yes, it's 50 plus test. Yeah, it's going to be 100 plus. It's going to be more than that because I think that's what we need. The other thing is really in terms of ease of use. Yes, integration into more LLMs and APIs, integration into more MLOps tools, right? So that really you can use part of the deployment process. And I think to your point, around having a web application, other things, I think really we just see as they come from the community, because definitely yes, there are kind of different ways that people are using this, and I mean when we did,
the other thing is because you're gathering a lot of information, you may want to consider integrating within an AI system logging tool like AIM. Because basically they can allow people to query all of these things that you're gathering easily. Yeah,
it's definitely I think would be of interest. I think we will just need to see between our enterprise high compliance customers and the open source ones, just integrate it. What's the best way to do it? But look, I think it's a very fast evolving ecosystem, right? So I think there'll be many more.
And to close, I mean, I think this is a great library. Everyone should look at it. It's accessible, and it's constantly being worked on and improved. And I think the fact that more and more of you listeners are using LLMs means you really need to take seriously all of these kind of tests that David has talked about. And with that, thank you, David.
Thank you very much.